Ohio State and Notre Dame. Hard to believe it's just 48 hours away at this point. Can't wait for kicking off the biggest game of the season and, frankly, one of the biggest games across college football anywhere in the country so far here in 2023. As the Buckeyes get ready for those Notre Dame Fighting Irish, let's do a little deep dive on the Irish personnel and get you set for what Ohio State should expect. Where might they have some advantages? Where are the Irish perhaps a little bit vulnerable? Where might the Buckeyes struggle a little bit because they're going to face a team that's really good in a number of different areas? We're going to get into all of that and certainly a little bit more too macro level on this game and its place in college football all across the country here this season. It's all coming up next live on the Buckeye Breakdown podcast.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Buckeye Breakdown podcast. Alongside Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick. Cannot wait for Saturday night. It's going to be as much fun as I think Ohio State fans have had all season long, and maybe even longer than that. This is a huge game with two super passionate fan bases. And, in this world of college football, maybe we don't always anticipate how much fun non-conference games can be. There's a lot going on. There's a lot changing in college football, but these two fan bases are still very much at the core of the sport. And Notre Dame hasn't beaten Ohio State in almost a century. Not quite that long, but not far away from that. It was the 1930s, the last time Notre Dame beat the Bucks. So a chance on Saturday for both teams to make a huge statement early in the year. And Anthony, I think you could make a little bit of an argument about who this game helps more if they win. But the reality is Ohio State would certainly allow their fans to take a giant exhale if the Buckeyes could get through this one clean. And the reality is if Notre Dame wins this game, it's probably their biggest win in a couple decades.
Yeah, and it for Notre Dame, too, it starts a stretch of like some really tough football here. They're in a tough part of their schedule. They got USC coming to town in a couple weeks. They got to go down to Duke next week after this, and then kind of finishing the year with some tough games. So this is on Notre Dame's side. This is the first step to try to make a playoff push. Same for Ohio State. This is a great first test for both teams. And I agree with you. This is the part that excites me the most is that this is the first time, in a long, long time that both teams, I think, in my opinion, are pretty evenly matched. And I think that's you think back to the Fiesta Bowl with, Brady Quinn versus A.J. Hawk, like Ohio State totally dominated. And you think back to Deshaun Kaiser versus the Ohio State Buckeyes when they were rolling. Ezekiel Elliott was on that team. Ohio State just went in there and smoked them. That was out in Arizona as well. And then you think back to even last year, like it was a game that going into it, you were thinking Ohio State was going to roll. Just Ohio State didn't look as clean, but still, got a 2-score victory. So I think out of all the years, this one's the one that is the closest matchup wise, in my opinion.
And even the Notre Dame team back in 2012 that played in the national championship game against Alabama, they got rocked in that national championship game. I just think that Notre Dame hasn't had a win on their resume that would resonate quite like a win over Ohio State would in a long time. And I even include the big victory they had over Clemson a couple years ago in that because Trevor Lawrence didn't play in that game. If Trevor Lawrence would have played, that certainly, in my opinion, would have qualified there. But Notre Dame has had a lot of really good showings over the years, and they are clearly one of the best teams in college football. But I don't know that I've considered Notre Dame to truly be one of those like absolute bona fide upper level, 3 or 4 national championship contending teams they've been the kind of team that's in that next tier that absolutely can knock you off if you are in that upper echelon. I don't think too many people have put them in the same level as Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. Frankly, just those three the last 10 years, and certainly Michigan over the last couple of years. A win for Notre Dame Saturday changes that quite a bit, and I think they are trying like crazy to be ready this week with a super veteran quarterback, and as we're going to get into here, a roster of pretty talented guys that they think they got a shot to beat the Buckeyes.
Absolutely. And truthfully, they haven't deserved to be in that tier. And it really goes back to quarterback play. Throughout the past couple of years, even last year, you had a team that was ready to go, I thought, in my opinion, and just kind of lacked the ability at quarterback. And I think that changes this year. Sam Hartman is kind of everything he's projected to be. I know that he was one of the guys that everybody wanted in the transfer portal this year, and Notre Dame was able to get him. So he definitely changes the game. And what I think is the most impressive on their side is, for the first time in a long time, he's made their receivers better. You've had the lack of talent, or I should say the lack of athleticism at Notre Dame, just being in that second or third tier of guys really is exacerbated when you don't have a guy at quarterback to make make your teams a little bit better. They have that guy who's really accurate now and can really stretch the field. So it just makes everybody on that team a little bit better. And I think one of the big things, and I think a really great place to start, is up front. I think Notre Dame on offense has a very, very good offensive line. It starts with Joe Alt playing at left tackle. He's 6'8", 322 pounds, son of a former NFL player. And if all projections are correct, he's going to be a top 5 pick going into the NFL draft next year. So, that's something that, has kind of historically been a Notre Dame, a pin in Notre Dame's cap, is that great offensive line play. On the other side of him at right tackle, Blake Fisher, he's a junior, a 6'6" junior, just another big dude. And they're really talking about these two guys of being, two of the best bookends in college football. And then inside, kind of flanked on both sides at right guard, Rocco Spindler, a 6'4" junior. And then at left guard, Pat Coogan, a 6'5" junior. And then in the middle, really up for one of the best centers in the country, number 52, Zeke Cornell, 6'3", 306 pound graduate, grad senior here, a fifth-year guy, and really played his career at guard up until last year. Moved to center. Is going to be, Saturday is going to be his 27th start for Notre Dame, just at a combination of those positions. So I think up front for Notre Dame is kind of where you get it going. And then, when you flip it back to the conversation that we've had about Ohio State's defensive line, I think that's going to be a matchup where you got to just continue to watch every time Notre Dame's on the field, is how is their offensive line controlling the line of scrimmage? Because when you're got an evenly matched matchup like we do on Saturday, whoever really wins that line of scrimmage is going to have a really nice advantage, throughout the game.
I get the impression when looking at this game that it's probably not going to be a super high scoring game. I don't think either team is looking at, hey, we need to win like a 42-41 kind of day. I don't know that I have, an insane amount of confidence in either defense to go out and pitch a shutout. We'll get into our score predictions a little bit later here in the week, probably tomorrow. But I just get the impression that both of these offenses are good enough that maybe more so Ohio State on the chunk play type side, but Notre Dame is plenty capable of methodically moving the ball down the field, and largely because of what Audric Estime can do. I don't know. He's certainly going to be the best running back Ohio State sees until the Penn State game. Obviously, Michigan runs the ball extremely well. You could make an argument Estime might be the best running back they see all year, period. And so I certainly think he's going to factor into this. But I don't know that I expect Ohio State's defense to quite handle Notre Dame the way they've shown out the last 3 weeks. And I say that because of that offensive line. Notre Dame's offensive line is really, really good.
Yeah, and from a schematic standpoint, I agree with you that it's not going to be, at least on Notre Dame's side, I don't think it's going to be a real big shootout day. Notre Dame is more of that pro style. They're pretty methodical. You'll see them in the shotgun. They'll have sets where they have 4 receivers out there. They're not going to live in that. They do have some pretty good tight ends. And if you go back, a really good game to just watch highlights of is when they played NC State. And their tight ends had a really great day. They do a good job of, when they get into the I formation, they'll get under center and they'll hand the ball off to Estime, but they'll also do a lot of play action. And it's been really good because Audric Estime's had such a great year so far, and he's such a great player that it's opened a lot of things up. Tight ends, the guys to look out for, Mitchell Evans, Holden Stays, and Davis Sherwood, all 3 of them really can make big plays. And you got to think when I watch those guys, Holden Stays reminds me a lot of Cade Stover, right? Bigger guy, very athletic. Maybe Cade's probably a little bit more active in the run game and like getting physical and like putting people in the dirt. Whereas like Holden Stays is kind of matches that. When you just watch him run, you think, oh, Cade runs like that. And when he catches the ball, he can make things happen and make big plays. So they have that big play ability out of the tight end room. But you're going to see a lot of this offense is run through the running game. It goes as the running backs go. So that could be a huge advantage for Ohio State. And you like that because you're one of your best position groups as the Buckeyes is your linebacking core. You got Steele Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg in there, and they're never going to be misaligned. There's never going to be a play on Saturday where Ohio State's defense isn't lined up correctly and isn't matching Notre Dame correctly because you have 2 veteran guys in the middle there, making sure that everyone's tied up right on their P's and Q's.
How about from a wide receiver perspective? Sam Hartman's obviously he's got a ton of experience under his belt. And he's had a really good year. Frankly, I think Sam Hartman's looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the country so far this year. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I'm willing to acknowledge Heisman potential quite yet, but through 4 games for them and 3 games for most everybody else the rest of the year, he's been one of the best productive offensive players anywhere in the nation. Talk to us about the receiving group.
Yeah, that receiver group, I've said it a couple times this week. I don't think that they're as athletic and they're going to match Ohio State's. Like when you see Ohio State's guys, they're in a certain tier. Notre Dame's guys aren't in that tier. However, just like I said a moment ago, Sam Hartman makes them better. So it starts with Jaden Thomas. He's currently leading the Irish, 12 catches for 188 yards. He's a guy, he's a 6'1" junior, so a real big body, or a bigger body for them, not a huge body, but a bigger body for them. And then Chris Tyree, I mentioned him yesterday or earlier in the week. He stands at 5'9". He actually was a running back the last 3 years for Notre Dame. So he's made his transition to a receiver and has done well. Had a big catch last week against Central Michigan, a 65-yarder. There. So he's someone to keep your eye out for. And then Tobias Merriweather. He's kind of going to be your big play or your big body guy. He stands at 6'4", and he's a sophomore. He's a huge body. So that's going to be like your stick mover, right? 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 10s, they're going to be looking for some of those bigger guys. So I think that, I've talked about how Notre Dame's going to lack athleticism on the outside. And I certainly think that the advantage will go to Ohio State. However, I do think those guys can make contributions because, of what Sam Hartman's capable of doing and making them play at a better level, maybe than what their skill would allow them to.
I think our defensive backs have got to play really well this weekend because I think it's going to be a legitimate challenge for Ohio State's defensive line. If the defensive backs can play really, really well, that might give the rushmen a little extra time to get home. I don't know that I expect Ohio State to blitz like crazy. And because you're playing a big and really good offensive line, it's going to be tough to get to Hartman. So I think there's a pretty big emphasis on the secondary to perform at a high level. And the good news is I think they've had a really good start to the season and that they're capable of it. But before we flip to the other side of the ball, I guess the question I want to ask, in your opinion, when Notre Dame's offense is at its best. What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I think it's they're running the ball and they're using the run game to get ahead on first and second down. Okay. So you're thinking Audric Estime is averaging 5 yards a carry, something along those lines. And that allows them to go then max protection, make sure Sam Hartman doesn't get touched, and then throw it up to some of the guys on the outside. I will say all of these numbers, very similar to Ohio State, very similar to a lot of teams in college football. Like you got to think of the matchups that they've played, right? Week 1 was Navy, or week 0 was Navy. Week 2, Tennessee State. Week 3 was NC State. They've been their best matchup. Think of them as Notre Dame's Indiana, if you will. And then last week against Central Michigan. So 4 opponents who aren't on that level, but they've looked smooth. So I think when Notre Dame's at their best, their run game's clicking. It's going. Every time they hand the ball off, they're getting some good yards, and then they're able to throw off that. If you get Notre Dame backed up, and if you get Notre Dame out of their comfort zone, they're having to throw on first and second down to try to get ahead. And that's when, JT and Jack should be pinning their ears back and being like, hey, it's time to go. I will say this, we've talked up the offensive line. They will give up sacks. They're not a Stonewall. NC State was able to get home a couple times. Actually had a strip sack in the first quarter against them last week, 2 weeks ago. So they're not going to just stonewall them. And one thing too with the the Notre Dame offense, they haven't put 4 quarters together yet. So they've had maybe a good start to the game, maybe a good first and second quarter, and then taking the third quarter off. Or maybe you've had a slow start to the game, and then you really kicked it into gear. You think of that NC State game in the second half. So they haven't played a full 4 quarters yet. Whereas I think Ohio State's trending in that direction where they've started to play a little bit more of a complete game, and they'll be able to take advantage of Notre Dame. If Notre Dame comes out sleeping or has a lull in the second or third quarter, Ohio State will be able to take advantage of something like that.
Yeah, I sure don't think the Buckeyes have played a full 4-quarter, eye-popping performance quite yet either, although obviously coming off their best win. And I guess the only caveat I would say with NC State, it was such a weird game. They had a really long delay, and it was kind of clunky.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, neither team has played unbelievable football so far. Mm-hmm. But both have shown glimpses of, wow, that was really impressive, and obviously have the talent to showcase themselves as one of the best teams in the country. The reality is college football, more and more is an offensive-minded sport, and so if you don't have a guy at quarterback that can really make some things happen, you probably don't have a chance to win big games like this. And Sam Hartman has won enough big games in his career. That Irish fans really believe in what he can do. And I think they feel confident that Saturday could be a huge day in South Bend. And the reality is Kyle McCord has had a really good start, in my opinion. But there's no way you could possibly say that any of the 3 games, prior to this would measure up to a win over the Irish. I mean, this is clearly test number 1, big test number 1. Mm-hmm. For Kyle McCord. And I think he's ready for it. I think he's going to play really well. Let's get into the Notre Dame defensive personnel. Why don't we start on the defensive line? Obviously, Ohio State's offensive line is going to have its hands full.
Yeah, I think we starting on the defensive line. Inside at defensive tackle, they're going to be led by Riley Mills, 6'5", 306 pounds, just a rock inside. Really tough to move. He's a senior, been around the block a couple times. And then his counterpart is Howard Cross III, 6 foot, 288, so a little bit smaller, but he's a junior on the field. He's been around a lot. He's a grad junior. So I don't know. His eligibility as a junior, he's been in college for 6 years. It's that same conversation we've had. And then a familiar face, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, that defensive end, former Buckeye there. So you've got to be thinking like, hey, he's probably trying to turn one up a little bit here this weekend. And then he's backed up by Kana Aswando Mansa. I probably messed that one up. But both those guys pretty much the same, 6'3", 6'4", 260, and both seniors. So I think that Notre Dame's defensive front is pretty solid, I would say. I don't think it's at the level. I think Ohio State's defense, if you were to compare them apples to apples, they're in a class above Notre Dame. So think of everybody on Ohio State being 1 tier up from everyone at Notre Dame, in my opinion, and especially starting on that defensive line, which is a very positive thing if you're Ohio State when we've seen what Ohio State wants to be, kind of maybe a run first and then throw second kind of an offense.
Yeah, but whether or not Ohio State has a slightly better personnel group on defense than Notre Dame does, this is still far and away Ohio State's best test against a good defense. And I am more concerned about what is Ohio State's offensive line going to do against this group, because, Josh Simmons is under the magnifying glass for me. He's played okay. I just wouldn't call it good. I don't think I would call it good enough. Donovan Jackson's been fine, hasn't been great. Carson Hinsman, I think, has played pretty well as a center. Josh Fryer's had probably the best moments of anybody on that line so far at right tackle, but he's also had a few boneheaded moments. And I think Matt Jones has been okay at right guard. The offensive line, I guess, in the words of Donovan Jackson yesterday, they're just trying to stack days. Mm-hmm. When the players met with the media last night, Donovan Jackson basically just said they're just trying to literally one day at a time, one rep at a time, just try to keep on stacking some things and keep getting better.
And they need to, because we heard what Coach said after last week. Like you could tell last week he was very the urgency was up. You and I have talked about it a couple times, but there was a point of emphasis to get the O-line to start playing better because they need to, because it will be, and I agree, there's a comment in there saying if the offensive line's not being talked about, that's a good thing. And I totally agree with that. Like if we're talking about the offensive line on Saturday nights or the next time we talk on Sunday, like that's a problem, because that means Notre Dame dominated up front, and everything that we've talked about and been seeing, like, those things linger and become a big problem against a really good team. So I couldn't agree more with you that the offensive line is where I'll be focused when Ohio State's on offense.
All right. How about the Irish linebackers?
Yeah. From the linebacking core, this is where I think Notre Dame's going to try to make some stuff happen. We talked earlier in the week about Maris Lufau. Like, this guy can fly. If he flies around, you'll be able to see him, right? He's going to be the Troy Polamalu guy. Big hair. They use him in a bunch of different places, right? They'll put him in that second level that your traditional linebacker, where he sits 3 yards behind the defensive line and makes plays from there. They'll also walk him up in different places. They'll walk him up on the ends. They'll walk him up on the middle. But he's kind of their moving piece, and he'll kind of be around. You'll see him kind of all over the field there. And then Tommy Eichenberg is number 27, J.D. Bertrand, 6'1", 233-pounder, and he's also a grad senior too. So he's going to be your veteran guy. Again, I think he's very similar to Tommy. I think they're a carbon copy of each other. They're not huge hitters, but they're smart as heck. They're in the right spot at every time, every play. They're going to make sure the entire team's lined up correctly, and everyone's in the right spots, and then they're just going to make plays. So I think he's going to be a guy to look out for. And then they have kind of these like floater guys. One's going to be Jack Kaiser. He wears number 24, 6'1", 230. He's also a senior. He's been around the block a couple times. And then number 12, Jordan Botchlow. 6'2", 220-pounder. They kind of float around. So they have these like outside linebacker types where they can be on the line of scrimmage and kind of be in coverage too. So I think that the second level of Notre Dame's defense is where some stuff's going to happen. And yeah, good question there. JD was out last week. Good question in the comments. It's looking like he is recovering. It was a concussion. So from what we've seen, what we know here, it looks like he's trending to play. So just kind of expect that. And if he doesn't play, his backup is Drake Bowen, a freshman. So that's certainly a different story there if JD doesn't go this week. But all signs are pointing towards him going.
I know we kind of got into the secondary a little bit the other day, but I don't think we necessarily went over, personnel in particular. It was more macro level talk. What do you think about the secondary?
Yeah, starting at corner, Cam Hart. He's kind of been a guy that kind of reminds me of Denzel Burke, right? You haven't really heard from him much. Hasn't given up much and he's seen a lot of football. 6'2", 200-pounder, and he's a senior, a 6-year senior. So he's seen some football. He's made some plays for Notre Dame. And then the guy that's been a very pleasant surprise is number 20, Benjamin Morrison. He's had a couple interceptions. I mean, he was a freshman All-American last year, so he is a sophomore, and he's certainly made some plays for Notre Dame early on. You would see him in that NC State tape. He appears a lot. So these guys, on the outside from the corner position, I think that I wasn't early on in the week. I wasn't like too worried about them, and I'm still not now. I think Ohio State's team and Ohio State's receivers are so good that it won't matter. But these guys aren't bums, right? These are some solid players, and they're going to be, kind of in the right position at all times. So from on the outside, those are the guys that you're kind of going to be worried about and going to be looking at when Ohio State's, kind of throwing the ball throughout the air.
So I'll ask you the same question about their defense that I did the offense. When that defense is at its best, what does that look like?
Yeah, they're able to stop the run and being able to keep the obvious throwing situations, making sure that they're obvious. I think that where Ohio State's going to have a huge advantage is when they're able to just drop back and let it rip. And that's where I think Ohio State's going to be. If they're winning this game, that's because, they're getting Notre Dame in man-to-man coverage because they're able to run the football, and Notre Dame's having to account for an extra guy in the run game. Because Marvin Harrison, if that's ever the case, is going to have a massive day because nobody on this team is going to be able to guard him. Emeka Egbuka as well. I think those two guys are in a class of their own. And if Ohio State can really control the tempo of the game, they can control when those guys are going to be able to take shots. So when Notre Dame's at their best, they're going to be able to stop the run with their front four and their front six-ish with the linebacking core, and then let the guys in the secondary just be secondary guys because big plays are going to happen. I think Ohio State's going to be able to move the ball. And you get really a sense of when you watch Notre Dame's defense play, you get this sense of bend, don't break is kind of their attitude. They're going to give up throws. They'll give up yards. But when, push comes to shove and you get into the red area, like they kind of buckle down and try to force field goals. So that's kind of the sense I get when watching them play. Like, hey, they're okay with giving up yards, but just don't give up 7. If Notre Dame's playing good, they're stopping the run and allowing 5 guys in coverage to defend against, Ohio State's passing attack.
Well, it's going to be fun to see how Ohio State tries to break them down because it should be a good test. I think the tight ends are going to be really involved in this game. I'm really looking forward to watching Cade Stover, and I think G. Scott's going to play a role. I don't know what personnel packages Ohio State will roll out there. Wonder if we'll see a little bit of what we saw against Indiana in certain situations where they try to go really big. I don't know that for sure, but I wonder if Ohio State may try to employ a little bit of that. And if they do, I hope it works because it'll be banging your head on a wall if it doesn't, right? Your best players are your wide receivers. So I prefer to see Ohio State spread it out, but I just have like a sneaking suspicion that Ohio State's going to try to showcase that it is as tough and physical as it is flashy on Saturday, if that makes sense. So I'm interested to see how Cade and G and if Joe Royer are getting in the game, same deal.
And Brennan, that goes back to, how the team in the game was called against Indiana. Like, was that something that they almost use as like, not a practice. You never want to say that a game's used as a practice, but like just trying to use a lot of that I formation stuff, because are they going to try to employ some of that this week? You just never know. I agree with you. I think that the tight ends will play a big role, but they got to just use them in the right spots. Making sure when you're throwing, you're doing that off of play action to get them in space. And then when you want to throw, we have our 4 best on the field, whoever that may be. It's Cade, it's Marvin, it's Emeka, it's Julian, and just making sure that from a personnel perspective, like when you want to play, make sure your best guys are out there to do that. I'm excited about it though.
Well, certainly Texas's win over Alabama coming into this week, I think resonates as the best win in the country. Obviously, a big Florida State win at the beginning of the year is certainly a good one too. But the winner of this game is going to put themselves right up there. In my opinion, the winner of this game will be a top 5 team in the country for sure, and maybe top 3. I don't know exactly how the polls are going to shake out this upcoming week, but if Ohio State goes and wins on the road, then everybody around the country is probably going to look at this and go, okay, Ohio State is who they largely have been, and they were able to go, on the road against a top 10 team in a tough environment with a young quarterback, and go out and ball out. And if Notre Dame wins this game, then they'll be 5-0, and it's going to be the biggest win that program's had, in my opinion, in a long time, and would validate them on the national scene as not just a fringe national championship contender, but would put them right in the thick of the college football playoff conversation. For both teams, a loss, I think, is still overcomable to get to the playoff, but I also think there's a lot more parity this year at the top than there has been in years past. And because of that, and still for one more year having only a 4 playoff team system, it could be tough for the team that loses this game to get in the national championship picture. But I think both schools have enough left on their schedule that if they ran the table the rest of the way, they could still probably be right there. You sure don't want to lose, though. I'll tell you that.
I think that's the biggest thing for both sides is like, hey, you're going into it. Both of them are thinking they can win and knowing they can win. But from a schedule perspective, if they run the table afterwards, you'd still think about getting in. But if you lose this one, the rest of them are going to be tough. Like if Ohio State loses this one, Notre Dame is like a carbon copy of Michigan. And if Notre Dame loses this one, Ohio State's like a carbon copy of USC, which is coming down the pipe in a couple of weeks. So you're like, hey, this one, both teams, like it's time. And I agree. It's Thursday. Like this is the last real work day for both teams. Like they're going to get their last practices in, walk through tomorrow, and then it's game day. Ohio State will travel over there tomorrow. Like it's here. Like this game's been building up for a long time. It's got so much hype to it, so much excitement around it. Both teams for the first time in a long time are like, hey, ready to go, and both really, really good. So, I'm fired up. I'm fired up to get over to South Bend. I'm going over Friday night, so I'm jacked up for that. And it'll be the environment's just going to be it's college football heaven is what it will be.
It's going to be electric. Can't wait. Be a lot of fun, and we've got you covered here on the Buckeye Breakdown podcast, along with Buckeyes Now on Fan Nation in the Sports Illustrated Media Group, BuckeyesNow.com for all the latest. We'll see you tomorrow as we give you our preview and prediction, give you some keys to the game as well. It should be a lot of fun, and, of course, we've got you covered the whole way. Have a great Thursday, and for Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll talk to you tomorrow.